We are now live. Sound check. Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee meeting for Thursday, July 7th, 2022. Sound check.
Okay, we are live.
Thank you and good morning. Welcome to the Audit, Finance and Admin Committee meeting for, what is the day of the week? Thursday, July the 7th, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website, that any presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and that members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternate format. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. And members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members may submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions and make comments. Please note that quorum is present today and that Councillor Maria Pearson, who is the chair usually, is in a meeting that conflicts with this one and will join us as soon as she can. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are 5 added delegation requests, all for today's meeting, respecting item 10.1, Citizen Committee Report from the Committee Against Racism, with the recommendations for changes to the Hamilton Police Service Board selection process. They are 6.1A, Marlene Demoa and Tamer Kazem, they are both from the Committee Against Racism. 6.1B from Kojo Damptey. 6.1C, Kim Martin, Social Planning and Research Council and No Hate in the Hammer. 6.1D, Lyndon George, Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. And 6.1E, Rabbi Hillel Lavery Yisraeli. Also note that there is a presentation has been uploaded for item 8.1, which is the Tax and Rate Operating Budgets Variance Report as at April 30th, 2022.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any discussion on the agenda? I saw a thumbs up from Councillor Powers, and the vote is on the screen.
And that vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there anyone in the council chambers today, any of the councillors in the councillor chambers today?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councillor Clark is in council chambers today.
Mr. Clark. Okay, and so, Madam Clerk, I'm going to need you to help me if Councillor Clark is wishing to speak, because I can't see him.
Absolutely. We'll also be putting it in the chat.
Okay, all right, and I will watch the chat. Thank you. Okay, and that carried. Any declarations of interest today? See none, so we'll move on. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the minutes of the June 16th, 2022 meeting? Moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, the vote will be on the screen.
And that vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Delegation requests. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the delegation request for today's meeting? Councillor Johnson and Councillor Powers. Any discussion on the delegation requests? I see none, so the vote will be on the screen.
And that vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Staff presentations. 8.1 Tax and Rate Operating Budgets Variance Report as of April 30th, 2022. It's the Budget Control Policy Transfers. Item I'll start that again. Report FCS 22042. And Mike Segarek, General Manager, Finance and Corporate Services, is here to present the Tax and Rate Operating Budgets Variance Report Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. It's nice to be in chambers again. The last time I had the privilege and opportunity to be at this podium was March of 2020. So it is nice to be back in chambers and nice to have the opportunity again to address committee here at the podium. The purpose for today's presentation provide a summary of the report that you have before you, which is the first of 3 scheduled 2022 variance reports. I'll provide a bit of a summary with respect to the tax and the rate operating budget variances. Also highlight our committed COVID-19 funding from senior levels of government and some of the challenges we're facing in 2022 surrounding COVID-related expenditures and committed funding, excuse me. And finally, I'll draw your attention to the recommendations in the report that are before you regarding continued participation around advocacy efforts tied to COVID funding and Appendix C of the report, which is tied to our complement and budget control policy. I'll start off. I appreciate this is a bit of a busy slide, so I'll just try to navigate committee members through the slide. What you'll see on the slide is that staff are currently projecting, again, based on actuals to April 30th and forecast to the end of the year, a tax-supported deficit of approximately 2.4% or just short of $24 million. You'll see as it relates to the program areas at the top of this slide, that all of the program areas departments are forecasting surpluses with the exception of healthy and safe communities. And the deficit of approximately 13% or $35 million for healthy and safe communities is tied to COVID-19 investments or expenditures. Also important to note that these figures currently reflect approximately $45 million in federal provincial COVID-19 funding. So again, that $45 million is already reflected and incorporated in the figures that are before you in this slide. So again, departments for the most part are projecting surpluses, but COVID-19 continues to have a significant impact to the city. We're forecasting approximately $80 million in COVID-19 related expenditures or investments in 2022. Not significantly different from 2020 and 2021, notwithstanding the fact that we are in a different stage as relates to the pandemic and transitioning to recovery. In 2020 and 2021, we were incurring approximately $100 million in COVID-19 expenditures. So 2022, we're forecasting less than $100 million, approximately $80 million, but still significant relative to the city's overall budget, which is net levy, which is approximately $990 million. With respect to boards and agencies, you'll note that Hempton Police Services, at the time of printing of the reports and preparation of this presentation, we had not yet received the Hempton Police Services variance for 2022. It has been presented to the board, I believe, Friday of last week, and currently Hempton Police Services are forecasting a slight favorable variance of approximately $300,000 for 2022. Hempton Public Library, you'll see are forecasting a favorable variance of approximately 4%, or about $1.3 million for 2022. You'll note further down, approximately 3/4 down this slide, with respect to capital financing, we're forecasting a favorable variance of about just short of 9%, or approximately $13 million. What's driving that favorable variance is not the cost to borrow. We're now approaching what we are budgeting for cost to borrow. We budget approximately 3% for cost to borrow, and because of inflationary pressures and the Bank of Canada's efforts to affect inflation and the higher borrowing costs, we're now approaching what we are budgeting for as it relates to cost to borrow. What's really driving that favorable variance is the completion time for capital projects relative to our assumptions as to when we issue debt. We only issue debt when projects are substantially complete, and currently we're seeing a favorable variance in that we are more aggressive in terms of our forecasting when projects will be complete and when we'll be issuing debt. Also important to note, looking forward as it relates to capital financing. Capital financing, again, is principally our debt, and the favorable credit rating change to AAA for the City of Hamilton will have a positive impact in the future as it relates to our borrowing costs. So inflation is clearly going to have an impact, and that the Bank of Canada will continue to increase borrowing rates. There seems to be some consensus that there'll be a 75 basis point increase next week, and possibly a additional increase of approximately 50 basis points before the end of year. So again, with respect to capital financing, we're seeing a favorable forecast of about $13 million. So with respect to total tax, again, we're forecasting a deficit of approximately $24 million. On the rate supported side, you'll see we're forecasting a deficit of just short of $3 million for a total forecasted deficit of approximately $26.5 million. I mentioned previously, COVID continues to be a factor as it relates to the city's efforts in service delivery and related expenditures or investments. And COVID investments and expenditures is a main driver as it relates to our year-end projected variance. We continue to see higher COVID-19 related service levels, and the principal difference in 2022 relative to 2020 and 2021 is the level of federal and provincial financial support in 2022. 2022 federal provincial support, again, is approximately $45 million, but that represents a shortfall with respect to a number of the city's responses or as it relates to the pandemic. You'll see with respect to housing and shelters, through this report and through the presentation, we're forecasting a deficit net of approximately $12 million in federal provincial funding, of approximately $23 million in housing and shelter costs. With respect to public health, we're forecasting a deficit of approximately $8.1 million, and this is tied not only to the COVID-19 public health response, but as well as a funding shortfall as it relates to public health's general program delivery. Paramedic fire services, we're forecasting COVID-related pressures of about $4.4 million, which currently are unfunded from senior levels of government. And finally, slot revenues, COVID-19 has had an impact as it relates to the level of participation at the Flamborough facility. And with respect to the slot revenues, we're seeing a forecasted decline of approximately $1.5 million in the revenue sharing that we realize as it relates to the slot revenues. You'll note that Council and SLT have approved a gapping target of approximately $5.1 million. We recognize that each and every year there are vacancies that may be tied to maternity leaves or tied to individuals who may be pursuing other opportunities and leaving the City of Hamilton that typically results in a gap between the departure of those individuals or the absence or time off of those individuals relative to filling those positions or backfilling those positions. And again, we refer to this as gapping, and our gapping target for 2022, Council approved, is $5.1 million. You'll note that we're forecasting actuals approximately $650,000 over the target for a forecasted total of about $5.7 million. And you'll see the breakdown across the program and departments. You'll note that Healthy and Safe Communities, principally because of the pandemic, are forecasting a unfavorable variance as it relates to their gapping target, as well as Planning and Economic Development are forecasting approximately $275,000 in actual gapping savings relative to the target of $866,000. So we will continue to review what is contributing to the gapping forecasts in these program areas and through subsequent variance reports, as well as through the August Outlook report, provide some additional information and detail to committee members. Now, I'm just going to shift a bit to provide some additional detail by department and program area. Just very quickly, you'll note that Planning Economic Development is forecasting a surplus of approximately $85,000. A number of factors contributing to that. I mentioned previously the gapping deficit relative to the budget target, some favorable revenues as it relates to planning, development, and growth. So I'll draw your attention to the bottom bullet. Is the city has a number of obligatory reserves that are tied to these program areas. Legislation does not allow the city to divert or redirect any surpluses as it relates to some of these program areas and the fees and charges that they generate. So currently we're forecasting approximately $4.2 million in additional revenues tied to building permit revenues, tied to building revenues, and tied to development fees. And so as it relates to that $4.2 million, that would be additional contributions to reserves at year end. If our forecast were to come to fruition at year end, and that would have a favorable impact as it relates to those program reserves at year end. Healthy and safe communities, you'll note, we are forecasting a deficit of approximately $35 million. What is driving this, again, is COVID-related responses and service levels. As it relates to housing, with respect to the operation of isolation services, drop-ins, and hotel rooms for the expanded temporary shelters, we are forecasting approximately $34 million in housing and shelter-related investments in 2022. Offsetting that is approximately $13 million in federal provincial funding through the Social Services Relief Fund Phase 4-5, leaving us with a shortfall of approximately $23 million. And so we continue to advocate and join with other municipalities, other partners, in advocating for continued support from senior levels of government to address our housing and shelter COVID-related funding shortfalls. Hempton Public Health Services, you'll note we're forecasting a unfavorable variance of about $8.1 million, and this is tied not only to the COVID-related response, but as well as to the general public health programs and some unrealized inflationary adjustments as it relates to provincial funding for 2022. While the provincial funding increased by 1%, the related expenditures did not increase at 1%. They exceeded the 1% provincial funding increase. With respect to Hamilton Paramedic Services, we are forecasting an unfavorable variance of about $2.8 million. And again, this is tied principally to COVID-19, surrounding overtime, medical supplies, and equipment. Hamilton Fire Services, we're forecasting an unfavorable variance of approximately $1.6 million. And this is principally tied to COVID-19, as well as some additional pressures surrounding fuel prices and equipment challenges surrounding supply chain. Long-term care, we are forecasting a deficit of approximately $0.4 million. Important to note with respect to long-term care, this reflects a $4 million contribution from federal provincial subsidies, COVID-19 subsidies. So we've already reflected $4 million in COVID-related subsidies, notwithstanding that $4 million contribution. We're still forecasting an unfavorable variance of approximately $400,000. Ontario Works, we're forecasting a favorable variance of $1.1 million. This is tied principally to some gapping savings of approximately $800,000, and as well as maximizing some provincial subsidies to the tune of approximately $200,000. Public Works. In Public Works, you'll note, and I'll highlight some of the pressures we're seeing in Public Works A bit of a shift in the theme away from COVID-19. While COVID-19 is clearly having an impact, especially in areas such as transit, we're seeing greater challenges tied to inflation and supply chain challenges in public works. Notwithstanding those challenges, we're forecasting a surplus in public works of approximately $2.2 million. That reflects some gapping surpluses of approximately $1.9 million. With respect to energy fleet facilities, you'll note we're forecasting a year-end deficit of approximately $200,000. One of the contributing factors that is some snow removal costs as it relates to Tim Hortons Field and some special events that occurred in 2022. Engineering services, we're forecasting a surplus of approximately $400,000. For environmental services, we're forecasting a surplus of $1.2 million. With respect to environmental services, we're forecasting some favorable variances as it relates to utility costs in our parks, approximately $700,000, as well as some gapping savings. And this is tied to some of the challenges we had with respect to hiring of summer students and seasonal students, and that represents about $600,000 in savings. Offsetting that is some additional vehicle expense costs, and again, tied to supply chain and some of the challenges we're having surrounding supply chain. With respect to waste management, we're forecasting an unfavorable variance of approximately $440,000. Notwithstanding the unfavorable variance is we are seeing some savings or additional revenues as it relates to commodities. You'll note that was our experience in 2021. We're forecasting about $1.5 million in additional recycling commodity revenues, as well as some savings, about $150,000 in our household special waste program. Offsetting that is principally inflationary impacts, as well as some supply chain challenges. Just to illustrate some of the inflationary impacts is while we budgeted approximately 2% for a number of the contractual services surrounding waste, such as waste collection, such as the central compost facility contract, we are experiencing, because of adjustments surrounding diesel and our contractual obligation to adjust those contractual commitments, we're realizing actual costs or escalations of about 4.5% to 6.48%. So that represents, in the case of waste collection, a additional pressure, unfavorable variance of $1.1 million. We're also seeing fuel pressures as it relates to inflation and supply chain, as well as geopolitical crises in the world. And so that represents a pressure of about $250,000 as it relates to our waste program. And then further, with respect to some of our contractual obligations, we're seeing similar contractual obligations as it relates to the central compost facility of about $250,000, again, tied to some of the inflationary adjustments that contractually were required and obligated to meet and satisfy. Transit, as I mentioned previously, COVID-19 continues to have an impact with respect to transit, both as it relates to savings surrounding darts and taxi script, as well as unrealized revenues as it relates to our fare revenue. Currently, the forecast that's before you assumes approximately $7 million in federal provincial Safe Restart funding towards our transit program to offset approximately $12 million in forecasted unrealized ridership revenues. In addition, we're forecasting about $6 million in savings tied to our DARTS contract, as well as our Presto obligations. A further savings of about $1 million as it relates to taxi contracts, as well as some gapping savings of approximately $500,000. Offsetting those savings and the subsidy for transit is, again, approximately $12 million in forecasted unrealized fare revenues tied to the pandemic. And important to note that staff are currently projecting that ridership will improve to approximately 76% of budget by end of year 2022. In addition, we've mentioned inflation and the impact of inflation and geopolitical on fuel costs, and we're forecasting a pressure of about $2 million for fuel costs for transit. So again, some savings as well as some subsidy, and offsetting that is some unrealized revenues relative to budget and some inflationary impacts as surrounding fuel costs for an overall forecast of approximately $45,000 favorable for transit. Transportation operations and maintenance, we're forecasting a year-end favorable balance of approximately $1.2 million. What's driving that is principally gapping savings due to seasonal staff and some delays surrounding hiring of seasonal staff and some vacancies that are tied to retirements, job transfers, and again, some seasonal hiring. And partially offsetting that is approximately $700,000 that's again tied to inflation, tied to fuel costs, both diesel and unleaded fuel. With respect to corporate services, we're forecasting a surplus of approximately $900,000. What's driving that is some gapping savings as well as savings in consulting and contractual. Offsetting that is some postage-related costs in our clerk's office. With respect to city manager's office, forecasting a surplus of $4,000. What's contributing to that is approximately $200,000 in gapping savings in human resources, and offsetting that is approximately $200,000 in unachieved revenues in the digital and innovation office. Corporate financials, we're forecasting a deficit of about $5.8 million in corporate financials. What's contributing to this, and this has been before committee and council previously, is some increases in our insurance premiums that's tied to cybersecurity, as well as some environmental exposure or risks, and that represents a pressure of approximately $700,000. Also, we're seeing an unfavorable variance in WSIB of approximately $2.7 million. And as well, you'll see that COVID-19, we're showing an expenditure of approximately $800,000, and that's tied to the Emergency Operations Center and the related costs for 2022. And finally, as I mentioned previously, is some unrealized slot revenue sharing with OLG, and that represents some unrealized revenues forecasted at approximately $1.5 million for 2022. Just very quickly, with respect to boards and agencies, as I mentioned previously at the time of preparation of this slide presentation, as well as the report, we had not yet received the Hempton Police Services variance forecast for 2022. It was presented to the board, and they are currently reflecting a favorable variance of approximately $300,000. Hempton Public Library, a surplus of approximately 4%, or approximately $1.3 million. And again, capital financing, we're currently forecasting a surplus of approximately $13 million. With respect to shifting now to our water wastewater storm program, referred to as our rate program, we are forecasting a deficit of approximately 1.1%, or approximately $2.9 million. What's driving that is revenues, some forecasted unrealized revenues, and this is principally tied to our industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. We continue to engage with our industrial commercial sector to try to better understand as they transition to recovery, how their demand for water, wastewater services may be changing. And so we hope that that information will help us as we develop the 2023 budget. But as it relates to what's referred to as the ICI sector, that sector, we're forecasting unrealized revenues of approximately $6 million. Offsetting that is our contract with Haldeman County. We provide water to Haldeman County, and we're seeing increased demand for that service with an associated benefit of about $500,000 forecasted for 2022. With respect to expenditures, we are forecasting capital financing savings of approximately $3.8 million in the in the rate program, and you'll see offsetting that is approximately $1.3 million. Again, tied to inflation and supply chain, and committee and council will recall the challenges we have with respect to liquid chlorine and some of the increased costs we're experiencing in 2022 as it relates to that particular chemical. So quickly, as I mentioned previously, 2022 is not very different in terms of the municipal COVID response and related investments and expenditure relative to 2020 and 2021. As we transition to recovery, people may expect that the burden on municipality has changed significantly, but we are approximately 80% of where we were in 2020 and 2021, or approximately $82 million in related exposure or costs. You'll see that we're leveraging approximately $45 million of committed funding. Social Services Relief Fund, approximately $11 million, that's tied to housing and shelters. Ministry of Health funding for public health, approximately $16 million. Transit, approximately $7 million as it relates to ridership and decrease in ridership. And then there's a series of other programs, approximately $3.8 million in the Healthy and Safe Communities program, and finally approximately $6 million in the COVID-19 recovery funding for municipalities that are reflected across a number of program areas. While I've touched upon most of these, if not all of these, the one area that I haven't touched upon is planning economic development. You'll note $2 million in funding is being apportioned to planning economic development, and that is approximately $1.5 million for unrealized parking revenues and approximately $600,000 or thereabouts tied to building services. So again, approximately $45 million in committed federal provincial funding, but you'll note that's leaving us with a shortfall of approximately $37 million. And that represents a principal contributing factor to our forecasted deficit. Important to note, had we not been experiencing this shortfall of approximately $37 million, we would be in a surplus position, or forecasting a surplus position of approximately $14 million for 2022. Hence, you'll see in the staff report, I believe it's recommendation B, that we continue with the advocacy efforts with our partners, other municipalities, in trying to secure the same level of financial support from federal provincial governments as we realized in 2020 and 2021 tied to the pandemic and COVID-19. So with respect to the outlook, again, very quickly, is staff continue to recommend advocacy as it relates to federal provincial funding. And I do want to note is that while we do have a COVID-19 city reserve, and I do want to recognize Council's prudent measure to set aside approximately $20 million in surplus funding in 2020 and approximately $15 million in 2021, which represents a reserve balance of about $35 million, is if we applied that $35 million to our 2022 pressures, COVID-related pressures, or unfunded pressures, it does not leave the City of Hamilton with much financial flexibility going into 2023 to continue to address the pandemic. And recognizing that the pandemic will continue to have related impacts in terms of service levels and response levels, is the majority of the funding programs come to an end in 2022, and that advocacy needs to extend beyond 2022 to continue to pursue federal provincial funding as this pandemic continues to impact the City of Hamilton and municipalities across a number of program areas and service areas, including those I've highlighted this morning. So again, what is before you is the information as it relates to the driving factors to the variance, as well as recommendation B, which speaks to continued participation seeking financial support from senior levels of government. And finally, staff complement transfers that are contained in Appendix C of the report that's before you. So through you, Madam Chair, that's the end of the presentation. Happy to answer any questions committee members might have.
Chair Vanderbeek, you're just muted at the moment. Sorry, Councillor, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm talking away and I'm very eloquent.
We hear you well now.
Forgot to push the button. Anyway, thank you, Mike, for that presentation. I have a speakers list that at the moment is composed of Councillor Clark, then Councillor Ferguson, and then Councillor Johnson. And Mike, if you could take, that's terrific. Thank you. Taking that down, I could see everyone. Thank you. So, Councillor Clark, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor. I hope life in Dundas is treating you well. A couple of questions about page 5 on this slide deck. It shows housing and shelters, 22.7 million unfunded pressure related to the operation of isolation services, drop-ins, hotel rooms, et cetera, et cetera. 2 days ago, we received a report from the city manager that indicated, and I don't have the exact figure, but it was $500 million. So much from the federal government, so much from the province, so much from the municipality. So I'm trying to understand and reconcile that information with the fact that we're short 22.7 million.
So through you, Madam Chair, maybe I'll start. And the 22.7 million is really tied to our COVID-related costs of $34 million. So just as it relates to housing and shelter services, we're experiencing additional costs over and above budget of approximately $34 million. So this is as it relates to isolation services, as it relates to our contracts with shelters, as it relates to hotel costs, as it relates to families and females, is we're forecasting an overall expense of about $34 million. Offsetting that is about $11 million in social services relief fund, leaving us a gap of just about $23 million. The $500 million that was presented by City Manager Smith was our overall investments. It might have been through the Rapid Housing Initiative. It would have included Rapid Housing Initiative, would have included investments City Housing Hamilton. So it would have been the overall housing portfolio. The 34 million and 22.7 million is tied exclusively to the unbudgeted COVID-related expenses surrounding housing and shelters.
And is it your expectation that that money will be reimbursed from the province?
So through you, Madam Chair, it is not my expectation, which is why it is presented. There currently is no commitment. It is my hope that the city realizes the full impact of the pandemic on housing and shelter services, as we did in 2020 and 2021. So I do want to give federal provincial governments recognition for their commitments in 2020 and 2021. We are hoping to realize that same level of commitment. Currently, though, we only have a commitment just short of $12 million, leaving us with this $22.7 million shortfall.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I request an information report accounting for the expenditures of the $500 million on housing?
Through the chair, that's coming already, Councillor Clark, as a result of the questions at my presentation on Monday. Angie Burden, the General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities, is putting an information report together on those details. And because of your questions, we'll just, add a paragraph in about how that relates to the deficit that Mike is speaking to today.
Thank you, City Manager.
So just to be clear, Deputy Mayor, my request during the city manager's presentation was the number of units that were created by the $500 million. But I'd also like to see where the $500 million was spent.
Yeah.
So yes, I'd like to know how many units we created, gross, net, break it all down so that we've all got the same information, and then where that $500 million went. Because when I look at and no fault of Mr. Zagarix, it's just the way that the accounting is. When you start digging in, it's really hard to find where that money went.
Through the chair, absolutely. We'll take your questions from today and Monday, and we'll put that information report together. A lot of the time, the funding is on for capital improvements, either new units or older units that need to be upgraded. Where we see more of the pressure is in those operating costs, but we'll make sure that's clear in the information report.
That would be most helpful. Deputy Mayor, do I have time for one more question?
Yes, you have 1 more minute.
Thank you very much. Paramedics and fire, 4.4 million unfunded COVID-related staffing costs, operating equipment, medical supplies, etc. So is this separate from the land ambulance agreement that we have with the province where they pay 50% and we pay 50%? Is this additional charges or costs over and above that operational and capital number?
Through you, Madam Chair, it is. And in the case of paramedic services, Councillor Clark's well aware of the funding agreement in terms of the cost sharing with the province and municipalities, including the City of Hamilton. Over and above that cost sharing in 2020 and 2021, Hamilton Paramedic Services did realize some COVID-related 19 funding as well. That commitment doesn't exist for 2022, so we aren't assuming that. We would hope that there'd be some level of provincial support for COVID-19 around paramedic services. In the case of fire services is not cost shared with the provincial government. And as a result, the COVID pressures we are assuming will be municipal pressures unless there were to be another program such as one of the previous recovery programs that we could apply fire services cost to.
Thank you for that. And Clerk, if you could put me on for a second time, please. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Ferguson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mike, just 3 questions. Number 1 is, during the budget presentations from Public Transit, the director said that they expected a significant improvement in 2022 in ridership because they'll start to be transporting students again to universities and colleges where they were working virtually before. With the deficit now that they're forecasting, did that not come to fruition?
Through the chair, that did come to fruition. And so I'll cite April figures to try to illustrate the benefit of that contract. I think that contract represents about $7 million in revenue. So as of April, our ridership was approximately 62% of relative to budget, but our revenues were approximately 79% relative to budget. It's because of that colleges and universities contract that the revenues are closer to budget than ridership.
Okay, but our ridership still has not rebounded to pre-pandemic levels yet.
Through the chair, it isn't. And so while April, we were at approximately 61%, I believe by May, we are closer to 70%, and staff are forecasting by year end to be approximately 76%.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mike, I'm surprised, as I suspect all the public will be, is that you're still spending $85 million on COVID-related issues. When, externally we've seen a big slowdown in COVID and less resources required, whether it's contact tracing or you're still running the big facility, the vaccination facility at Limeridge Mall, but the others are all closed. So I'm just surprised that the $85 million is running at 85% of what we experienced with the peak of the pandemic. I don't expect you to answer that. They are what they are, but it just came as a surprise to me. And my last question to you, you have a lot of relationships through your associations and your advocacy to senior levels of government. Are you getting a warm and fuzzy feeling that they're going to cover that $85 million for us again in 2022? Or are we being told no?
Yeah.
Mike?
So through the chair, I'll start, and I'm not sure if City Manager Smith, through her discussions, wishes to add on. I would say for 2022, while the senior levels of government are listening, we're not, my experience has been, we're not getting the same response in 2022 as we did in 2020 and 2021. So recognizing that senior levels of government have their own fiscal challenges or issues, I suspect that's a contributing factor. I think it's critical that municipalities educate senior levels of government as to some of the constraints that municipalities have. And I'll just highlight one example of the value of education. And when one looks at all three levels of government, the principal difference for municipalities is if at year end we have a deficit, we need to turn to our savings, our reserves, to offset that deficit.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Just very quickly, senior levels of government can issue debt to offset that deficit. And so there's some education, I think, that would benefit in terms of how municipalities face different constraints in dealing with deficits, forecasted deficits relative to senior levels of government.
And if we empty the reserve fund, which I think you said is $35 million, does that, in addition to the funding level that's committed for the senior levels of government, does that pretty well clear out the $85 million that you're short this year? Recognizing, as you said, that doesn't leave us with much of a reserve if, in fact, we dump that whole $35 million in the COVID reserve in 2022.
Yeah. So through the chair, I'll maybe refer to slide 3 here to try to illustrate if this were year end, what recommendations we may be presenting to committee. So again, if we were to have a tax supported deficit of approximately $24 million, we could transfer $24 million out of the about $35.6 million COVID reserve. Leaving us with a balance somewhere in the area of $11 million, $12 million in that reserve. But what that would not, or what that would incorporate is, you'll see library has a forecasted surplus of $1.3 million. We would change our practice previous years. We may claw back that $1.3 million surplus and not pass that along to library. With respect to capital financing, we have approximately $13 million in capital. We use those year-end surpluses to shore up future years' infrastructure investments. So we would have no funding capacity in terms of that surplus to shore up or make incremental investments in future years as it relates to infrastructure. And so while the reserve has sufficient balance to offset the $34 million, it's beyond that reserve contribution that I'm concerned about. It's what I'm concerned about is, again, not having financial flexibility going forward, not being able to transfer some capital surpluses to future infrastructure investments, having to claw back from boards and agencies such as Hempton Public Library or potentially Hempton Police Services. So those are the concerns I have if our current forecast were a year-end forecast.
Okay, that's a good explanation. Thank you for that, Mike. And my only observation on this, Mike, and I think we've talked about this in previous years, these mid-year forecasts are very conservative. And I've seen too many times where you're forecasting at this time of year a big deficit at the end of the year, and then we turn into a significant surplus by the end of the year. So I suspect it's a conservatism that people in all departments probably have built into their budget. So I'm not terribly concerned about it, your numbers based on previous years. But I don't expect you to respond to that. But it's just been the history that it's not as bad once we get to the year-end numbers when actual numbers come in. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I understand that City Manager Smith would like to say something.
Thank you, through the chair. Just wanted to briefly add on to Mike's comments in terms of the potential of getting additional funding from the federal and provincial government. I can tell Council that this is a priority topic with the GTHA mayors that the mayor participates in, as well as myself and GM Zagaric. And so we regularly as a collective gather up what our collective pressures are from COVID so that we present that united front, and it was very successful in the early days of the pandemic. It's also a priority topic for the Ontario Big City Mayors that, again, Mayor Eisenberger sits at, as well as the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Big City Mayors. So collectively, the mayors, both in the GTHA, the province, and across the country, are continuing to explain to those other levels of government what those pressures are, and will continue to do so and support the mayor in those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Councillor Johnson, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Mike. Always learn everything. Most of my questions have been answered except for one, and I don't know if I missed it. So, Mike, you said at the beginning of your presentation that you've always budgeted for 2% interest rate when applying for loans and things. But given the market, you're now having to budget differently, but I don't believe I heard the amount. What is the amount now that you're budgeting for your interest rate?
So through the chair, we currently assume 3%. So that is what's reflected in the 2022 budget. Based on current rates, and let's assume the Bank of Canada increases the overnight rate, so all financial institutions increase borrowing rates by 125 basis points or 1.25%, we'd probably be at that 4.25% cost to borrow. And so the 3% obviously is less than the 4%, but I'm not suggesting there are not options. You know, this may be a bit of a blip and that borrowing costs may drop in 12 months' time. So we'll develop a strategy as to how we manage the risks around future debt issuances. And my final comment, as I mentioned previously, the improvement in our credit rating to AAA, that also provides a benefit, and that translates into a lower borrowing cost.
So if the interest rates continue to rise and our budgeting doesn't catch up, then we're going to see a different variance report next year. So what is prime now, like today? Do you know?
So through the chair, I believe we're at 1.75 the overnight rate, with a forecasted 75 basis point increase on July 13th. That seems to be the consensus.
Well, thank you, Mike. Always with the good answers, and you seem to have everything on top of it. Can you do my checkbook next? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Clark for a second time.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, but actually Councillor Ferguson asked all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, I have no one else on the speakers list. So if I could have a mover and seconder to receive the presentation. Moved by Councillor Ferguson and seconded by Councillor Johnson. To receive the presentation, please indicate your vote. It will be on the screen momentarily.
Thank you. And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn the chair back to our usual chair, Councillor Wilson, who has joined us again. And
thank you, Councillor Van Beek. I apologize, committee members. I had an issue on Heritage Committee that involved a property in my ward that I needed to attend this morning. And unfortunately, we get meetings that cross over, and we all know that. So I'm going to move on now to, and I thank Councillor Van Der Beek for an excellent job as I sat and listened at the end here. So we're on to public meetings, public hearings and delegations, 9-1.
Sorry, to the chair, we received the report, the presentation, but now we need to approve the report, the recommendations.
Sorry, I thought that was all done. Okay, so may I please mover, so the report and to mover and a seconder on the recommendation. It was moved in second to just, sorry, Angela, just clarify.
Sorry, my apologies. So we received the staff presentation. That's what we just voted on. And now this is on the recommendations of the report. So I still need a mover and a seconder. Okay,
I'll ask Councillor Powers. I saw your hand go up, and Councillor Van Der Beek then. Moved and seconded. All in favor, please.
Thank you. And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And back on the roadmap. So we're now at item 9.1, delegations respecting item 10.1, Committee Against Racism, Citizen Committee Report recommendations for changes to the Hamilton Police Services Board selection process for today's meeting. We have here 6.1A is Marlene De Amoa and Temur Kwazim, Committee Against Racism. 6.1B, Kojo Dampty. 6.1C, Kim Martin, Social Planning and Research Council and No Hate Nammer. 6.1D, Lyndon George, Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. And 6.1E, Rabbi Hillel Lavery Yisraeli. I hope I didn't disturb the way those names should have been pronounced. We'll now hear from the delegates who have registered to speak on item 10.1, and we will receive all of the delegations once they have addressed the committee. And a reminder that delegates, you have 5 minutes in which to speak. So I'm going to Marlene, please. Good morning, if Marlene's there.
Good morning. I will be speaking on behalf with Tamar Kazim. I am the vice chair of the Committee Against Racism. And Tamar, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tamer. I'm the chair. I apologize for not having my camera on. I'm not in my usual office setup. I'm at an Airbnb with my wife, so for bandwidth issues, I'm going to keep it off.
Okay. Go ahead then. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Marlene, do you want me to keep going?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Chair, Ms. Mary Pearson, and members of the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. Like I said, my name is Tamer. I'm the chair, or the current chair of the Committee Against Racism, CAR for short. We are an advisory committee to the Hamilton City Council, and as a reminder, our mandate is to report to City Council on issues and concerns pertaining to racism and provide advice to address the impacts of racism through the Audit, Finance, and Administration Committee. Today, I would like to speak to the committee about the Citizen Committee report submitted by CAR regarding recommendations to the Hamilton Police Services Board selection process for the citizen appointee position. I would also like to highlight the importance of these recommendations as they provide an opportunity for building trust with marginalized communities. In this report, we are recommending that the selection committee for agencies, boards, and subcommittees be expanded to include representatives from equity-seeking communities when selecting the citizen appointee to the Hamilton Police Services Board. The current process lacks representation from Hamilton's racialized, Indigenous, Black, Muslim, Jewish, and LGBTQ communities. Furthermore, community representation is key for including voices and lived experiences to improving policing standards and relationships. The committee would recommend 2 potential candidates to City Council for consideration as the new citizen appointee of the Hamilton Police Services on the Hamilton Police Services Board. The purpose of this CCR, the Citizen Committee Report, is to ensure community groups and individuals have an opportunity to be part of the selection process by including specific organizations and community leaders. The CCR also seeks to assist Council with the selection process by providing candidate recommendations. Public engagement through the selection process will provide significant alignment with Council's commitment to inclusive representation. And I'll end my presentation there. Marlene, do you want to add a little bit more before we allow the councillors a chance to ask any questions?
Thank you. I think also it's important to note that this Citizen Committee report very much aligns with CAR's work plan and has involved the need to engage at a really deeper level with our Hamilton community. And we see the CCR report as a collaboration with HARC, with our wider community, to really look at operationalizing EDI initiatives concretely. There was a time that CAR during this current mandate had done a deputation to the Police Services Board, and in that deputation had outlined the need for the board to be more diverse and reflective of the community. And we see this CCR today as being in alignment with that, and an opportunity to, as you'll see, the number of people that are delegating today, that we have engaged with our broader Hamilton community, and this is something that we want to bring forth on their behalf. I think it's also important to note that in terms of the CAR committee has sort of a level of expertise with respect to EDI, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and that it's really important that we support alongside our community in suggesting that you take the recommendations from the committee from the CCR today and ensure that we look at a Hamilton Police Services Board that's more reflected and representative of our community. So our request is really, a really good example of sort of a model of good governance. It's important that the community sees themselves represented at the board table, and that this is really an initiative that CAR would recommend that you support. Our CCR today is also an attempt to address the public concerns raised about, previous selection processes, and allows a level of transparency and community representation. And this is a concrete solution to build ongoing, intentional, meaningful relationships with the community. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, and within time. Any questions of the presenters, please?
Councillor
I see
Powers.
Councillor Powers. Sorry, I just glanced over. Thank you. Councillor Powers, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Tamer and Marlene, for your presentation. Your explanation really helped me out, because I don't know how many times I read the committee's recommendation and I found it very, very confusing, because what I was finding was the intermingling of the words selection committee for agencies, boards, and subcommittees, and then the prefaces with regards to the police services board. So what you're asking, and this is, and correct me, when I'm wrong, is what you're asking for is the ability to be part of the discussions of the selection committee for agency boards and subcommittees when they discuss the recommendations for the citizen appointees to the Hamilton Police Services Board. And then I'll have a supplementary question.
Thank you.
Through the chair, Councillor Powers, yes, but I don't, the way it's worded is not for CAR itself to be part of those discussions, but more so members of the community from various equity-seeking groups to be part of those discussions. And I'll go ahead and just highlight that our goal is not to is to provide two recommendations to City Council to allow them to make the final decision. Is not to make the final or force the final decision at that point.
So Madam Chair, supplemental.
Yes, please.
So what you're suggesting is there, and I'm going to use it, you're going to have a subcommittee of the council's selection committee for agencies, boards, and committees to be part of the recommendations, or are you just going to offer up two suggested individuals, or do you wish to be part of the interview process that comes up with the two representatives, which in turn then are offered to the council's selection committee?
Through the chair, we'd like to be part of the process, and we'd like to work with city councilors to come up with the two candidates that go to city council for a final decision.
Okay, and just confirmation, this is only for the police service board's nominees.
Yes, yeah, and specifically for the citizen appointee.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your answers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm glad that Councillor Powers asked that question, because now I'm confused. I thought you were looking for one of the 7 racialized people groups in Hamilton to be our appointee, but that's not the case. The way the question was answered to Councillor Powers, you're saying that there should be a representative on the selection committee that's from one of those 7 areas, but not necessarily has to be someone from those 7, what do you call them, racialized groups to be actually appointed to the Police Services Board? Have I got, because it's not clear. Can you just confirm that for me again?
Absolutely. So through the chair, the goal is, and the actual execution of this may need some final tweaking, but the goal is to expand the selection committee, because right now, from what I understand, the selection committee consists only of city councillors. So the goal is to, when it comes to the Hamilton Police Services Board, citizen appointee position, when that selection happens and that process goes underway, our recommendation is to expand that selection committee to include community representatives. And the ratio that we're recommending is 60% community representatives and 40% council representatives. And those community recommendations will then come from those various equity-seeking groups, and including the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center and other community leadership. And together they would work together to pick two candidates that would then go to City Council for final approval.
So just so I'm clear on that again, if there's 9 representatives on the selection committee, you want 5 to be from one of these 7 groups and 4 from City Council. Have I got that right?
Yeah, through the chair, yes.
Okay. Now you keep talking about 2 representatives. There's only 1 representative on the Hamilton Police Services Board. So the committee would only recommend 1, which is the 1 position we fill, because the board is made up of 3 members of City Council, 1 citizen representative, and 3 representatives from the province, for a total of 7. So we only appoint 1, where the province appoints 3. So why do you keep talking about 2? I don't understand that. Why would you recommend 2 to council?
Through the chair, I think it's the idea is not to be. We didn't want to, let's say, quote unquote, just. I don't have a better word for this, but hijack the process. We wanted to kind of fit in with the current process where we wanted to continue to give council the opportunity to provide input into the whole process. So we thought it would be better to recommend 2 people, and then the city council could pick between those 2 people who they actually wanted to appoint to the Hamilton Police Services Board. Alternatively, if you like to narrow that down to just 1, then that's totally fine as well. It's totally.
Because it's very difficult for the city council to pick from 2, because they weren't part of the interviews, the people who are not in the selection committee. So it's not putting them in a fair position to choose 1 of 2 if they didn't participate in the interviews. And so, are you aware that there's a member now from the Indigenous community on the police board? In fact, Pat Mandy is the chair. Are you aware of that, I assume?
I may not be, but I suspect some of the other delegates would already know this.
Through the chair, yes. We are aware that Pat Mandy is the chair of the Police Hamilton Service Board.
Okay, that's all my questions this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I ask the delegates, because not to be disparaging, the report is a bit confusing. And I would suggest that there be a free-flowing discussion at governance to understand exactly what the request is, and have staff report back on the feasibility of the request before the council makes the final determination. Is that a reasonable process for you as going forward?
Through the chair, so Clark, are you asking us?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would think that would make a lot of sense. I think the overall fine tuning and execution of our recommendations is would benefit a lot from input from staff, especially from your governance committee that looks at this on the day-to-day basis.
And that governance committee would invite members of your committee and residents in general that would like to speak to it, to that committee, so that we can have that broader discussion to understand the issues, the challenges, what you're trying to accomplish, and how we can work with you to satisfy your concerns and improve the selection process in general. So again, that process would make sense to you, Tamar?
Through the chair, it would to me, Marlene. I'm not sure if you have any concerns about Councillor Clark's suggestion.
Through the chair, I think the idea is that the community itself wants to be part of the process and engaged in the process. And as a community and represented by the number of, in terms of from the, the Hamilton Black leadership community, the Jewish leadership community, the Muslim community, Indigenous, to us LGBTQ, to AI+. It's the idea that we want as a community to be able to put forth some committee, we want to recommend, be able to have an opportunity to recommend citizen members that we would consider in terms of supporting our community to the selection committee, and that selection committee ensure that they are looking at these two individuals as potential citizen appointees for the Hamilton Police Services Board. So I think any opportunity that there is to increase that pool from the community, to have people that the community is putting forward, and being able to be at that table and to have that conversation. So I think any process that you're looking at that will engage the community and ensure that there's a community voice at the table when we're having these selections, I think I would suggest that our community would be, the Hamilton community would be okay with that kind of process.
Speaking to Councillor Ferguson's point where he indicated that 3 are provincial appointees, how is CAR approaching the provincial government to request a more diversified selection in terms of their appointees? Because generally, from my understanding, Councillor Ferguson can clarify whether or not it's accurate, is the city doesn't play a role in those provincial appointees. It's the province that makes those decisions, and then it just happens. Comments from Tamar or Marlene on reaching out to the province with the same concerns?
Through the chair, I think my initial thought, Councillor Clark, would be that might be outside of the mandate of our committee. Our committee's mandate is to provide advice to Hamilton City Council. If requested, I think we can try to look at, see if we can reach out provincially, but I think originally we would have considered that outside the scope of our mandate.
You are correct. That is nuanced, but the council could most certainly forward any communications with recommendations from your committee to the province, so that the province is aware of this dialogue that we're having in the city of Hamilton. So without infringing on your sphere of authority, if we were to copy the province again, you would be okay with us taking that step?
Through the chair, Councillor Clark, I think that our committee would be in support of that in terms of engaging with the larger province in terms of the appointing of the 3 citizens that we really don't have any control over, but would really think it's important that those are people that have that are sort of well known in the community and have done things that are in support of racialized, diverse, and somebody that's on the ground. And I think when we looked at what it is within our sort of purview of control to do, the one thing that we looked at is that we have some control over the one citizen representative. And I think this is what this CCR is attending to. I think the CAR would be in support of taking our concerns as outlined into this report to the province and to be making them aware of what Hamilton as a community is saying and our concerns about the lack of representation on the police board. So I would think on behalf of the committee that we would be in support if that is something this committee would choose to do.
Thank you, Marlene and Tamar. And it's good to hear Tamar's voice. And it's good to see you, Marlene. Chair, I think I'd like to hear from the rest of the delegates before we make any final determination, but I think that we most certainly owe this report further dialogue with the residents who have been involved in crafting the report. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have Councillor Powers. Second time, sir.
Madam Chair, could you just put me back on the list after we have heard from the other delegates? And then I would like not only to have questions, but I have some comments also.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, and everyone. And I appreciate the questions and answers. And hopefully clarification has been arrived at as far as the process of the request. So the next speakers may not have as many questions. So I have items 6.1b is Kojo Jempty. Kojo, you're in person, I believe, in Council Chambers?
For the chair, yes, he's just coming to the podium.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I would like to say that today I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a resident, not representing any organization or group of individuals. So I wanted to start by asking a rhetorical question. Why is the committee asking you to take this immediate action? There has been a Stephen Lewis report on race relations in Ontario. There's been a report a report of the Commission on Systemic Racism in the Ontario Criminal Justice System in 1995. There've been an independent police oversight review, an independent street checks review, a use of deadly force review in Canada. And all of those reports clearly state that police services across Ontario engage in racist behavior and practices, and in extension, oversight bodies are not doing enough to hold police services accountable and to keep Black, Indigenous, racialized, and marginalized communities safe. In one of the reports, they highlight an example in 1993 where the Toronto Police conducted secret surveillance of prominent Black community organizations and leaders. The Police Intelligence Report of April 25th, 1989, which was shared with other police forces, contained information about individuals such as their date of birth, social insurance number, addresses, organizational affiliation, and automobile license plates. All persons named were of African heritage. This issue was presented to the Toronto Police Board, and no action was taken. In this report, one of the recommendations are traditional structures of police governance are insufficiently accountable and inaccessible to the community. It also states that police boards were said to be too weak to regulate effectively, too distant from the concerns of ordinary people, and too close to police leadership to provide oversight. So this is why this committee and community members are asking for an inclusive process to determine who the citizen appointee should be for Hamilton. In 2018, when we found out the individual that was appointed, there were community members that came to this council to say that we need to review the process. So now, this is the option that is being presented to you, and you have various community members here that are speaking to it. So I hope that you take this recommendation and you implement it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Kojo. Any speakers? Well, within time as well. I see no questions because we're going to probably hold off to the end. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Kim Martin, Social Planning and Research Council, and No Hate in the Hammer, and she's also present in council chambers.
Madam Chair and members of the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee, good morning. My name is Kim Martin. I'm the Executive Director of the Social Planning and Research Council, and I am the co-chair of the No Hate in the Hammer Coalition. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here today to support the Committee Against Racism Community Report, which includes recommendations to change the selection process for the citizen representative appointed to the Police Services Board. Currently, as we have just heard in the previous delegations, the selection committee is solely comprised of city councillors. The Committee Against Racism has suggested a model wherein the selection committee would include 60% community representation and 40% council representation. This would mean that members of community would have the opportunity to work in partnership with the city and, in essence, to take ownership with the city with respect to this important selection. And as we know, when we work together, working together helps develop trust. Any opportunity that we have to better connect city councillors with the people that they serve is an opportunity that can only strengthen Hamilton. The report goes further to recommend that the 60% of community-based selection committee members be comprised of equity-seeking groups and HARC, the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Centre. This, in my view, is critical given the disproportionality to which Indigenous, Black, racialized, 2S LGBTQ+ communities experience negative police interactions. And as we've witnessed so many times, these community groups, as well as those from Muslim and Jewish communities, are more likely to experience hate incidents and hate crimes that are a result of their status as an equity-seeking group member. This in itself makes them key stakeholders in this process. But in addition to this, these are also the members of community who are and have been underrepresented at decision-making tables. This underrepresentation stems from systemic barriers like selection processes that simply haven't been inclusive. The report and its recommendations are a tangible step forward to take ownership of that and to implement meaningful change. We know that when we have a diverse group of people working together, those groups make different kinds of decisions. They make different kinds of decisions because they're guided by different experiences, assumptions, and perspectives. The model that's been proposed clearly also supports the Council's aim to embed equity, inclusion, and diversity principles into their processes and practices. This is an initiative that both the Social Planning and Research Council of Hamilton and No Hate in the Hammer support, and we believe that it will help improve the Police Services Board as well if we extend this to other public boards. We encourage the committee and the council to embrace this report and all of its recommendations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kim. And I see Councillor Powers wishes to ask a question.
Ms. Martin, thank you very much for your presentation. I thought I was clear on what the ask was, but then you made a couple of statements that once again threw confusion into my mind. So we are just talking, and I'm going to use the we, the collective we, yourselves and ourselves. We're only talking about selection to the Hamilton Police Services Board. We're not talking about changing the process. where the selection committee for agencies, boards, and subcommittees will become a constituted mixed membership on it. Could you provide clarity, please?
Through the chair, that is correct, and I understand that what has come before this committee really is a recommendation for the police. I think there could be an opportunity for us to lead in this area and to see where this could extend in other areas for the same reasons that have been previously addressed.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Councillor, once again, just put me on the list at the very end. Thank you.
Got that on the radar, sir. Thank you for that. And I see no further questions from my colleagues. So Kim, thank you very much. I'm now going to go to Lyndon George, who is joining us today virtually. Hi, Lyndon.
Hi, good morning. I'm going to start off with a quote. Diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having a voice that is heard. Madam Chair and members of the Audit, Finance, and Administrative Committee, my name is Lyndon George, and I am the Executive Director of Hamilton's Anti-Racism Resource Center. I would like to take this opportunity to share what today's report is about. It's about good governance, providing opportunities for Black, LGBTQ, Indigenous, Muslim, Jewish, and other equity-seeking groups the opportunity to have a seat at the table when choosing Hamilton's community representative to the Hamilton Police Service Board. Good governance and oversight ensure difficult conversations about policing are not ignored until the data validates community concerns. Good governance allows for dialogue and examining ways to improve the way we collectively define the term community policing. Second, the report is about trust. As an organization, we are listening to community voices impacted by racism and discrimination. The questions we continue to hear from Black and Indigenous community groups that statistics show are disproportionately impacted by police's use of force is, are they listening? Today's report is an important first step in acknowledging that community voices are valued and a key part of building trust with Hamilton's diverse community. In Ontario, police service boards oversee how policing is provided in local communities. They contribute to the community's safety and well-being by working with local citizens and organizations to make sure community receives the appropriate policing it needs. Police service boards are responsible for budgets, determining objectives, priorities, policies for effective management, recruitment, and appointing the chief of police and deputy police chief. The board is comprised of 7 members, as you've heard today from other members of council, the makeup of what police service boards look like. 3 members of council, 3 provincial appointees by the Lieutenant Governor General and Council, and 1 person appointed by resolution of City Council. And the report speaks to that one position. Because of the provincial legislation, really and truthfully, what we're asking for today is the opportunity to make changes at the one level that we can here today, and that's at the municipal level. The time is now to make that change in the way that we select community appointees to the Police Service Board. The proposed changes would include the committee being comprised of a 60-40 separation, 60% community representatives and 40% community council representatives. The report recommends including HARC, members of the Black, Jewish, Muslim, Indigenous, LGBT, youth, and other equity-seeking groups to the table. To summarize, today's Committee Against Racism Citizen Report is about good governance, helps to create a sense of belonging, provides opportunities for building trust with marginalized communities, and addresses long-standing community concerns regarding representation at the Police Service Board. It provides a solution to the community concerns and supports Council's call for EDI principles at the committee and subcommittee level. We ask you to support the report's recommendations and help Hamilton take an important step towards building a more inclusive selection process for the Hamilton Police Service Board. Thank you, and with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Lyndon. I know I saw Councillor Ferguson's hand go up while you were speaking, so but I do have Councillor Clark on the list. I'm going to recognize Councillor Ferguson because I did see your hand way as before and Lyndon was speaking. So go ahead, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Lyndon, you sure have a great radio voice. Yeah, you'd be a great broadcaster. It's very clear and precise and calm. So congratulations on that. You mentioned at the start of your presentation that you think that the Black and the Indigenous voices are not being heard. And I just want to repeat again that the chair of the board is Indigenous. That's at the most senior board position. Do you not feel that the Indigenous voice is being heard currently?
Through the chair to the councillor, I believe that representation is important, but it's one aspect of ensuring that community is having a say regarding who represents community. And the selection process for the one seat ensures that those voices are at the table, listening through those interviews, talking to community, having those connections. And so that seat, as opposed to the provincial appointee method, means that community voices are there at the table helping city councillors make an informed decision. And so I think having more diversity in the room, diversity of thought, as you heard from the executive director of the SPRC, Kim, was mentioning before how important that helps improve the decision-making process. And I think that that's really key. And so I hear you through the chair to the councillor regarding individuals who are there now. But I would also say, not having someone in the room to help make that decision feels as if that voice isn't being validated when concerns are being raised.
And I'll go back to what you argue that it's not part of the mandate of this committee, but certainly your organization can certainly go to the province because they appoint 3. We only appoint 1. And have you considered your organization, well-respected organization, approaching, our conservative MPPs? There's 2 of them in Hamilton now to make the same ask as you're coming to our committee for, because we only appoint 1, and we have a guiding principle that's generally worked well for us, that we appoint the most qualified person to the, particularly when you're looking for certain skill sets, and whether it be legal or accounting or so on. Would your organization consider going to the province and asking that you have influence on at least one of the provincial appointees?
Through the chair, I think it's an important question to look at the Police Service Act and talking about how we do appoint representatives. When you think about other communities having this discussion as well, whether it's in Toronto or in Ottawa, there is a need to have a conversation about oversight and policing in a broader aspect. And I would say that these changes here help send a powerful message to provincial legislatures to say, in Hamilton, we are looking at how we do the selection process, and empowering them to do the same kind of critical analysis and review. And so I would say here, this request helps empower organizations like ours to take that next step to the province and ask for those changes.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, Lyndon. Are you aware, I know that this discussion is happening across many municipalities in the province of Ontario at the present time. Are you aware of any municipality that has modified their selection committee process as of yet, specifically for police service board selections?
Through the chair to Councillor Clark, it's a question that through my research, I wasn't aware, and I often think of Hamilton having the opportunity here to be at the forefront of that change on the civilian appointee, and that's the unique opportunity that city councils have as they appoint that one person, that we can redefine that change. And so, at the current time, I'm not aware. Oftentimes at the end of these moments when these live broadcasts happen, I'm sure I'll receive a tweet from someone in a municipality far, far away. But in the meantime, at this time, no, I'm not aware.
You and me both, that we get those tweets afterwards. Thank you for appearing today. I really appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lyndon. And now I will go to Rabbi Hillel Lavery, Israeli. And it says here in person, so we'll just wait till he comes to the podium.
Yeah, I'm there. Madam Chair, councillors and guests and fellow delegates, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Rabbi Hillel Lavri Israeli, and I'm a rabbi of the Jewish community here in Hamilton and representing other ethnic groups as well, and No Hate in the Hammer as well. And I'm here to lend my support and encouragement for this initiative that we're speaking about. It's a well-known fact that, especially throughout the so-called Western world, there's a huge disparity between the racial demographics of those employed by and controlling the police forces on the one hand, and the demographics of the people those police forces are charged with serving and protecting on the other. The hopefully unintentional result is an abundance of racial biases among the police affecting their performance, and an active distrust of the police on the part of the people who arguably need their protection and service the most. A month or so ago, I stood here at City Hall to respond to the recently published police report about hate crimes in the city, where we reiterated the fact that the statistics on hate crimes in our city are greatly skewed, since many people feel unsafe reporting the hate crimes perpetrated against them. At the very least, they feel that they will be not heard and that their reporting them will be ineffective due to the inherent biases. So this situation needs to change immediately. Therefore, the suggestion that is being discussed here, I feel, is most welcome. Having more diversity and representation of various racialized community groups in the selection and decision-making processes will serve to strengthen the ties between the police and the people and help us see Hamilton becoming a safer place for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Councillor Ferguson, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Rabbi, welcome. Rabbi, are you aware that at least during my 5 years on the Hamilton Police Services Board, and I think she was there longer, we had Madeline Levy as a member of the Hamilton Police Services Board, who was a very active member of the Jewish community in Hamilton. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I know her. Yes.
You're aware that she spent at least 5 years, I think it was 6 or 7 years, as a representative from the province on the Hamilton Police Services Board.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay, so well, I just want to make sure you're clear about that. That's all I got right now. Thank you.
Thank you. So seeing no other speakers for Rabbi Hello. Councillor Powers, you want to speak at the end after all the presentations, correct, sir?
That's correct, Madam Chair. Do we need a motion to receive the presentations and then the item becomes our, and then I'll speak.
Thank you, and that's what thank you again, Rabbi. So I'm going to now ask that we have a motion, please, moved by Councillor Power, second by Councillor Vanderbeek, that we receive the delegations. And electronic, sorry, getting there. There we go. Okay, good.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And now on this, but then we have the discussion item, correct, Angela, which is 10-1. And that is staff present on this. So Councillor Powers, did you want to speak before the staff presentation?
No, I'd like to hear the staff presentation and once again, leave me on the speakers list. And I'm thinking that Councillor Clark will be also.
I just want to be sure that I keep the process going. So we're now on to 10-1. Is Committee Against Racism Citizen Committee Report, recommendations for changes to the Hamilton Police Service Board selection process. We have staff present as Morgan Stahl and Sunil Engrish. I don't know who wishes to start off on this and where they are.
So sorry, through the chair, there is no staff presentation on this. They're just in attendance should you have questions.
Okay, thank you. So with regards to that report then, well, then we'll go to Councillor. They're not going to make a presentation, Madam Clerk?
So to the chair, no, it's a citizen committee report.
Yeah,
so
gotcha.
it's just
Okay.
the report coming forward. Did you want to have a mover and seconder to put the item on the floor?
Yeah, we'll have, say, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Ferguson, moved in second to put the report on the floor then and the recorded vote. Or we'll have it on the floor then. Questions, Councillor Powers, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the delegations this morning. I got to tell you, from a personal standpoint, the clarity they provided to my questions and the questions of my colleagues, I think, are very, very helpful in considering the proposal that's being made. I think it's worthy, very clear, worthy of consideration. But to use an old cliche, the devil's in the details. Is I think the proposal. Well, I know that the suggestion made by Councillor Clark to refer it to the governance committee to allow them to once again be in attendance, answer the questions, and then that committee would sort out the details if it's the desire of that committee. And then ultimately, I believe, Madam Chair, it finds its way back to us anyway for approval of the recommendations if it binds council to that. And so in keeping with that, I'll leave it and would support Councillor Clark if indeed that's the direction that he's suggesting. But a lot of very good information was shared with us today, which makes it worthy of further consideration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, sir.
Thank you. Just one quick question for staff. Are you aware of any municipality that has ventured down this road to have citizen members on the selection committee for appointees to boards, agencies, and committees?
Andrea Holland, City Clerk. I'll take that, Madam Chair, if that's okay.
Great. Yes.
Through the chair. So when this report came forward, I did reach out to a number of municipalities that are would have the selection for police services boards. And Toronto, Ottawa, and Halton Region got back to me. And of those three, they do not have citizen members on the selection committee for police services board. When I was deputy clerk in Burlington, however, when it came to the citizen advisory committees, of course, Burlington doesn't deal with police services, but at the citizen committee level, we did have members of those committees and the council liaison present for the selection committee of members. So it's not uncommon, but it is uncommon for police services board.
So the process in Burlington would be that the selection committee members would be there for the interviews and the questions of applicants, and that during that process there were citizen members present, perhaps from the committee that they are currently representing, and the staff person who was the legislative assistant, my terminology, maybe not Burlington's, for those committees were also present for those interview processes. Is that my understanding?
Through the chair, yes, we had a different process in Burlington than what we have here today in Hamilton. I'm not familiar with what other municipalities are doing at the citizen committee level for recruitment, though.
So, Chair, can I make just a couple of comments? I have no further questions.
Yeah.
Some of these reports that have been coming in nationally and provincially about biases within the police, racial biases within the police, are incredibly disturbing. I don't know anybody that could have read those stories and articles and not be concerned. And so we cannot turn a blind eye to it. We need to understand it, and we need to find a way, a system to ensure that there are people with lived experiences that are assisting us, whether or not it's in the selection process or actually serving as citizens on the committees. The report, very well written, and I appreciate the committee for presenting the report. It is a bit confusing when we talk about 2 members being appointed to the police service board, and we're only actually allowed to appoint 1 citizen member to the police service board. And then there's another section that talks about the selection committee being 60% citizens and only 40% elected members, and that's a disparity in the process. I think it would behoove us, Chair and committee members, to refer this to the governance committee and ask staff to provide whatever information they can find with regards to other municipalities that have gone down this road, and provide their comments on the feasibility of the requests that are being made by this citizen panel. I think it would be foolhardy if we ignored it and just received it. So I would encourage us to refer it to governance, further the dialogue, and see if we can come up with a solution that meets everybody's concerns. That would be my suggestion at the appropriate time, Chair Pearson. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no further speakers. I'll just relinquish the chair to Councillor Van Beek real quick to also just comment. I want to thank the citizen reps that came before us today. I'm pleased to get more information, more education. I think it's imperative. I think it's a guidance for us, and it's important that we listen astutely on this. I don't have a problem with this going to governance committee. I do, though, through Madam Chair, Acting Chair, like to ask the staff, because I'm assuming the motion coming forward will also ask staff to have whatever information from other communities available for the governance committee. But my concern is timelines, and maybe if I could direct to Madam, not Angela, but Madam City Clerk, what we're looking at as potential timelines. We're getting awfully close to the end of this term, and I'm sure whatever needs to be done should be in place before the end of this term.
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, it is getting pretty tight. However, members of citizens who sit on those committees are appointed until they are replaced.
Councillor.
Oh, okay, and I understand that, but we start the process for advertising for applications right into the new term, if I'm not mistaken. So, so are you saying then, Madam Clerk, that this could potentially be something that we could be finalized in the new term of council?
So we can absolutely report back and get a final answer from council before the end of this term.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's my only concern. I just make sure that it's on the record. So then with that, I see no further speakers. I'll turn back to Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark, if you're prepared to put the motion on the floor, and I believe your seconder was going to be Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the City Clerk clarification on the last statement? Are you suggesting that we have the time between now and August, whatever it is, August 18th, the 22nd, whatever, that we have the time to review the process with other municipalities, consult with the community and the committee members to look at options and alternatives before the next term of council? Or are you saying that you would be able to have your report coming back to the council, and then the governance committee of the new council would be the one that would be reviewing it?
Through the chair, my timing was towards the end of September to have council make that decision by the end of September. There's nothing preventing this council from making a decision on the selection committee composition for the Hamilton Police Services Board by the end of September. So
the lame duck provision doesn't apply with this governance process?
It would not.
Excellent. Okay. So my suggested wording would be to have staff report back on options and alternatives to the governance committee, and the governance committee can review it and hear from residents, and then make recommendations to council by September.
And that your seconder is Councillor Powers. You're okay with that, Councillor Powers? Thank you. So does everyone have understand that motion on the floor?
Can I just get confirmation from our staff that that's a reasonable process? I'm seeing nodding heads, Chair. The whole front, it's like those dogs in the back of your window with the head nodding. The entire front bench was just doing this.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, electronic vote, please.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you. And we're going to go on now to item 10.2 is the Governance Review Subcommittee Report 22-003, June 23rd, 2022. We have, Andrea Holland, Janet Pilon, and Elizabeth Richardson in staff is available. And I have a mover and a seconder to put this report on the floor. Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Johnson. And any questions or comments to this report? Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm confused by the report. I was at the committee, and when I read the bolded information, members of council appointed committees will be presumed to have an approved exemption and shall work with the city to develop a reasonable appropriate combination, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's presumed, but if it's determined after they're appointed, and I'm thinking primarily of members of council, we had a great discussion at governance about this, and I thought we put an amendment in place, but I don't see it here. And the amendment was that are presumed to be exempted, but if they're not, then the matter would be referred to the Integrity Commissioner to take appropriate action. I don't see that here. But that was the amendment that was made at committee. Maybe the question could be directed at either Angela or our clerk. She in fact clerks us both committees. Was that amendment not passed?
So through the chair, I believe that you wanted to see one of the items moved up, and it was. So if you go to the policy itself, which is Appendix B or C, hold on, my apologies. You wanted it to be option B and then relocate section 6 in the terms and conditions, which was the non-compliance. So that is on page
83.
Thank you, Councillor. So Appendix D. And you'll see on page 5 of 13.
But Angela, I don't have an Appendix B here. I have an Appendix A.
Appendix, is it D? Appendix D like dog.
Okay, I have an Appendix A on eScribe.
Okay, I can go at it a different way.
I think it's important to the members of the committee. This is what we discussed at governance. And committees, you know, our policy is very clear. You must be vaccinated unless you have a medical exemption. And if you're not vaccinated, you wouldn't be able to sit on a steering committee, but on council, we don't want to be governing ourselves. So if someone's in violation of our policy and is not vaccinated, it would be referred to the Integrity Commissioner for appropriate action. It's got to be made very clear.
Councillor, just bear with me just one moment. I'm just pulling it up a different way.
But it should be right in the committee report.
Well, it is. You'll see on page 2 of 5 on the committee report that, sorry, it isn't Appendix D, it's Appendix E. That Appendix E to Governance Subcommittee Report 22-003, the mandatory COVID-19 vaccination verification policy, be amended to include option B as the preferred option, and then it speaks to that. And then you'll see II to relocate section 6 of the terms and conditions non-compliance with the mandatory COVID-19 vaccination verification policy as section 2, renumbering the remaining sections. So when you go, my apologies, it's Appendix E. when you go to page
Madam Clerk,
5.
I don't have Appendix B, C, D, and E here. I have Appendix A, period.
Councillor, scan down through that and you'll get DE. It just follows. So it's about page.
All of the appendices are in one uploaded package, Councillor. So if you just scroll through them, you'll find it. Scroll to page 6 of appendix. It says Appendix E at the top.
Okay, but let me go right back to what we're looking for approval on today, which is item number 2.
Yep.
A and B.
Mm-hmm.
The bolded part is not clear what we're trying to do. It just says members of council will be soon to be exempted, approved exemption.
Yes, but then
But there's not many of those being handed out, as we all know. There's not many medical exemptions that are being handed out. And I just want to avoid a situation where candidates running for office aren't aware of the fact that if you are not vaccinated and if you don't have an approved exemption, then you must be referred to the Integrity Commissioner for appropriate action.
So
it's not clear on Part B,
the chair,
changes.
Right in the policy, it says members of council, unvaccinated members of council shall comply with their approved accommodation plan from the city, and failure to comply may result in a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner.
Jill, can you give me the page number, please? As I'm scanning to find that.
Yeah, so it's Appendix E, page 5 of 13. It really depends on how you're going about it. If you go through the city's website and click on AFNA committee, it's Appendix A through H to the Governance Review Subcommittee report. So the governance report will be one click. The other click will be Governance Report 22-003, Appendices A to H. And it's on page 22 of that, or page 5 of 13 of the amended Appendix E. So the Appendix E was amended to move that section respecting the Integrity Commissioner up to immediately follow, which was what was requested at governance.
Okay. I was at the governance committee and I still find this complicated. It'd be nice if it was set up as Appendix A through E as we typically see them, not all buried in Appendix A, to make it easier to follow. But I wonder if we shouldn't be also be putting it right in the candidate's handbook that clerks hand out, that if you're not vaccinated and you don't have an exemption, it'll be referred to the Integrity Commissioner for appropriate action. Because to expect candidates to read through all this and understand it all is going to be difficult. And it could get us into an embarrassing situation post-election.
I believe the city clerk wishes to speak to it.
Through the chair to Councillor Ferguson, this policy, the current approved policy, is within the candidate package for all anybody who's registered their nomination forms with my office.
So, Andrea, do you not find there's no linkage to the report that you're asking us to approve today, or do you think it is? Maybe it's just me being thick.
Through the chair, the amendment that was approved at governance is before you.
You think it's clear? You think it's clear in the resolution that's before us under item 2?
Through the chair, the resolution affirms the changes made to the policy itself. So that's why you have the amendment that was approved as well as the amended policy. So it is necessary to look at the amended policy.
But all you say, okay, and I'm anxious if other people are being confused by this also, because Part B only talks about you're presumed to be an approved exemption. That's all it talks about. It doesn't go into all the explicit details saying that if you don't have a medical exemption and you are not vaccinated, you will not be able to come to the council table to be referred to the Integrity Commissioner for appropriate action. If I read this, it looks like all they got to do is have a screened off area at the table. And I don't think that was the intent.
Through the chair, it's the policy that is implemented, not the resolution. The resolution speaks to the policy that's adopted and amended.
And Councillor, just so if you go in your appendices down to Appendix E, you have to scan down.
Appendix A, go into Appendix A.
No, the attachment on the agenda today.
It's called Appendix A. Then you got to, in Appendix A, you got to roll down to what?
Roll down to page 22, sir. And on page 22, it is listed. In the policy, your concern is addressed in there about having to go to the integrity commissioner. I'm going back to it now.
I'm trying to find page 22 because I can't.
Just keep scanning down. You'll see the pages.
I see one of 12.
Oh no, it should have 36 pages in Appendix A.
So Councillor, I believe you're on Appendix D right now because it's 12 pages. If you keep scrolling past the 12th page of Appendix D, you'll get to the first page of Appendix E. And if you go to page 4 of Appendix E, you'll see it there.
Right.
I'm on Appendix E now. I'm on page 12 of 13. Okay, go.
Go to page 4 of 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the bottom.
So keep going down to the bottom now. And you'll see members of council appointed committees will, that's not the right part, members of council required to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 unless subject, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, keep going. And then you'll see number 2 on page 5, which says non-compliance with the mandatory COVID-19 vaccination verification policy. So then it says employees and then members of council. Unvaccinated members of council shall comply with their approved accommodation plan from the city, and failure to comply may result in a complaint to the integrity commissioner.
I take it you saw it, Councillor? Or you
I
see
did.
It? Okay.
But it's buried on page 5 of 13 of Appendix E. You know, how is this going to get in front of candidates? She's got to be vaccinated or have an exemption.
Madam Clerk just clarified that it already is in there. Would you please restate, Andrea?
Through the chair, when we did our presentation to all candidates in March, it was highlighted that this was one of the policies. It is also included in the candidate portal that all candidates who hand in their nomination forms will have they do have access to, of course, all corporate policies that are pertinent to being a member of council. And this is one of those policies.
And you think that's going to be clear to, you know, probably 40, 50 candidates that register? Because I don't know how you could have done a presentation to candidates in March because nominations hadn't closed yet. We're still a month away from that. Okay, I just think we're setting ourselves up for an embarrassing situation. If there's some candidate that's not vaccinated and he hasn't read through this multitude of pages, that he's not going to be invited to the council table because he must be vaccinated, and that the whole matter be referred to the integrity commissioner for appropriate action. It's a pretty strong statement, and I'm not sure it's clear. But if I'm the only one that feels this way, I'll let it go. I'm just uncomfortable with it. That's all, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. But your concern and question and direction at committee were implemented. It is in the policy. So with that, I just want to be sure. Councillor Clark, did you wish to speak to this?
No, the clerk clarified the position, the statement that I was going to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powers.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail and you've got to do a lot of drilling down, but it clearly, well, I'm about to say, yes, it's there. I'm taking back the word clearly. I think, you know, a down and dirty, information sheet, just a one-pager that goes on the city's webpage is probably a snapshot of these multiple pages. It's just a suggestion, but yes, I confirm that what's been asked for by the committee is indeed in there, but sometimes it's lost in the details and that. So just a suggestion that, a summary page somewhere might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll just relinquish the chair because I'll ask a question then to Andrea Holland. So Andrea, when candidates come to the counter and register, are they giving anything in black and white that stipulates the requirement to be vaccinated?
Andrea?
Through the chair, all candidates are given the same amount of information. They're given a copy of the ward information. They're given a copy of the financial statement forms. They're given a copy of the use of corporate resources. They're given a copy of the vaccination policy. They're given a copy of the counselor's guide prepared by the ministry. There's a whole number of documents that it would be expected that any candidate running would read through all of the documentation to ensure they have a clear understanding of running for the role.
And you said the vaccine policy is given to them.
Absolutely, that's in the portal as well.
Thank you. I believe it's covered off. I think the clerk's department has done an excellent job, and we'll just see where things go from there. So with that, we did have Councillor Powers, second time, sir. Sorry.
So just supplemental is it will also be any information pack that will go to applicants for the various subcommittees of council.
Sorry, Councillor, could you repeat that, please?
We will be advertising for volunteer members of a number of the city committees. And can I confirm that information or similar information that you're talking about in the candidates packages will be in the candidates volunteering to serve on city committees?
Through the chair, yes, Councillor, that information regarding the vaccination policy will be there, as well as the application form before you in the selection committee policy has been amended as well.
Thank you. I'm prepared to move the motion if you so require, Councillor Pearson.
Yes, I thought, Madam Clerk, Angela, did we not have a mover and a second to put this on the floor already?
Yes, we did, and I believe it was Councillor Powers that moved it.
Thank you. And seconded by?
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Then we'll ask for a recorded vote. Thank you, everyone.
And that vote carries 5-1.
Thank you. Item 14 is private and confidential. It's the June 16th, 2022 closed minutes. I won't read it all off. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the closed session minutes of June 16th, 2022. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. All in favor? And Councillor Powers is a thumbs up.
And that vote carries 6-0.
Thank you, everyone. Item 15 is a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Johnson. Electronic vote, please, everyone. Councillor Powers is a thumbs up.
And that vote carries 6-0. Thank you, everyone.